Hello and welcome to Behind the Headlines for the week ending August 28th, 2020. I'm Michael Curran from the Ottawa Business Journal. Behind the Headlines is a podcast from OBJ to explore the most read local business stories of the week. Once again, I'm joined by my two colleagues, Peter Kavesi and David Sally. In today's podcast, we'll take a look at three important stories. First off, a new report on the state of Ottawa's economy. Second, COVID-19 rule changes that could help the meeting and convention sector. And finally, an Ottawa startup that is pursuing carbon capture technology. So let's go right now behind the headlines and start with number one. Peter, we're going to start with you. A big week for OBJ, the Board of Trade and Welch. All those organizations are partners in a project called the Ottawa Business Growth Survey. This is a big annual survey we do, and it really looks into a couple key factors, including local business confidence, as well as some related economic data. Tell us a little bit about the big reveal we did on Thursday.
So we had a big virtual event. We had economists, market researchers, and investors all analyzing the results of the Welch LLP Ottawa Business Growth Survey, as well as sharing their own insights into the state of the economy, both here in Ottawa as well as in the context of the Canadian economy. Some of their conclusions could be, in one word, bifurcation. One of our something we heard repeatedly is that companies could almost be divided into one of two categories: those that are continuing to do okay, or even a little bit better than okay, and those that are still struggling. To paraphrase our keynote speaker, Michelle Romano, a big Canadian tech investor, as well as one of the dragons on CBC's Dragon's Den, we've almost divided our economy into companies that are dependent on bringing large numbers of people together, and those where can deal with their customers and employees remotely. That's a bit of a colorful take on it, but that was one of the major takeaways that I had when I first started looking at the results of the survey that we did. Is just there is this large dichotomy. Just one example, we asked business leaders about their hiring intentions, and certainly the picture overall is nowhere near as rosy as it has been in previous years. But what really struck me is that you still have just as many companies saying they plan to expand their employee headcount as those that say that they need to introduce some reductions. It's a similar story when we're talking, or when we asked about revenues and net profits. You really have companies, almost an equal number of companies, saying we're still growing, things are still looking good ahead, and those that are saying we're having a really tough time. What's interesting as well is that this also has implications for our broader economic recovery. There's some suggestions that this divide's only going to get even further. You have some companies that are really in a position to totally reinvent some business categories. To pick up on an easy one, you have in e-commerce companies that are getting into like grocery delivery. There's so many of our activities that it's likely going to be a long time before we go back to the way things were, if ever. And you have these companies that are potentially really poised to see some explosive growth as they, again, totally reinvent these activities that have been disrupted from COVID-19.
I thought it was interesting. By the way, I love that word bifurcation that you used there. I'll have to try to work that into my vocabulary a little bit more. But there is a giant schism, And in fact, let's move on to story number two, Dave, and we'll go to you on this. It's a perfect segue. You're going to speak about the tourism industry, but more specifically, these sectors aren't all the same, and they're assemblies of different types of companies. So even in tourism, Dave, I suspect we'll see some rebound in hotel occupancy, but we're going to talk about meetings and conventions. That one's a lot more tricky, right? So people might travel and need temporary accommodations, but will people come together physically? So Dave, anyway, let's get down to the story at hand. There was a rule change that allows meeting and convention facilities to have more people in their facility in a safe way. Tell us about what that means.
Right, Mike. Well, exactly. Late last week, the province changed its rules regarding meetings and convention spaces. When it moved to phase three last month, the province initially said that convention centers like the Shaw Center, the Infinity Center, would only be allowed to have 50 people in the entire building at any given time, not counting staff members. Well, last week the province changed things a bit. They felt like things were moving along safely enough in terms of physical distancing and the rest that they could up that limit to 50 people per each individual meeting room in a facility. So, what does that mean for venues like the Shaw Center? Well, I talked to Nina Kressler the other day. She is the president and CEO of the Shaw Center. And she's been in the job for about 5 years, so she's seen the boom times of 2017 Canada 150 when the Shaw Center was jam packed with all kinds of events, and she was really initially expecting 2020 to be even better. They were aiming for a banner year. They had more than 50 events booked at the Shaw Center, which would have been a record, and things were looking great. They were expecting 63,000 out-of-town visitors, $19 million in projected revenues. Well, obviously, overnight, when the province shut down the convention centers in March, all that disappeared. So for the rest of the summer, she had to lay off most of her staff temporarily. So last week, when she got this news that the meeting spaces, that the capacity limits would be raised, that came as very welcome news. She said, they've already been hearing they've been getting quite a few inquiries from groups looking to book meeting space this fall. So she thinks it's going to help somewhat for the rest of the year. It's not going to it's not even going to come close to making up for that shortfall, but at least, especially once kids start getting back to school, once we see what that means in terms of infection rates, that more people will start thinking about business again. And, and she's really hoping that will kind of trigger a bit of a rebound. And she says that her staff's already seeing, bookings for next year, that people are rescheduling the events they would have had coming to the Shaw Center this year. They're now changing, saying, we'll come next year instead. So she thinks 2021 is going to be a pretty strong year. Nonetheless, she says it's going to be 3 or 4 years at least before that international business, those conferences from the US and other countries, really start to come back. And she says it's probably going to be, whether and when a vaccine, an effective vaccine, really comes into play. That's when you're going to start to really see those numbers pick up again.
Yeah, Dave, it was a bit depressing, to be honest, reading the GM's comments about how we were about to set a record year, and we wanted to ramp up business at the Shaw Center. It's been a big business issue, and obviously through a lot of hard work, they were making a change to that, and poof, it just vanished overnight. Peter, I want to get your take on this. OBJ also checked in with another, besides Shaw Center, checked in with another Canada meeting convention space. What did they have to say about these COVID-19 rule changes around 50 people in various rooms?
So over at the Brook Street, the general manager there said the immediate impact would actually be felt more on the social side, so specifically weddings. So those will likely be some of the first events to come back now that these rules have been relaxed. The picture on the corporate side, I should say the business meetings and conventions side is a little more uncertain. So there is this question of, just because a business is able to have these larger meetings and other corporate events, will they want to? Is there going to be comfort in still bringing these people together for these events? But also, interestingly, picking up on something that Dave said, there's this idea that we're really going to get an answer to that question in a few weeks once the calendar is firmly turned over into September. Everyone's back from vacation. Business decisions are being made. There's this perception. I swear it feels like it's been growing over the last decade or so that a lot of business decisions aren't made over the summer, and once everyone is back in fall, that's when businesses will be deciding whether or not to be holding these offsite corporate events again.
Yeah, I think, again, those comments were bang on, right? It's probably the local social events that might be able to come back to meeting convention. If there was a major convention planned for the Shaw Center, they're not going to, go ahead with their conventions because of this rule change. They're more likely to reschedule down the road. Anyway, Dave, let's get to our third story. Really interesting story about a startup that is working on something called carbon capture technology, and really trying to develop some innovative approach to it. So tell us about this company.
Yeah, Mike. Well, like you say, it's almost like something out of a science fiction movie in a sense. And I mean, in layman's terms, it's one of those things that it's kind of hard to get your head around in a sense. But in a nutshell, this company here in Ottawa that was just launched last year, called Planetary Hydrogen, is it's looking at a way to actually it's found a way to capture carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and actually turn it as a byproduct of this process, create hydrogen, which can be used as a clean burning fuel. So it's a really interesting process, and the guy behind it, Mike Kelland, is actually he's a mechanical engineer by trade, and he was in the software business. He's a bit of a serial entrepreneur and has had several companies. When he sold his last one, he said, "I want to find a climate unicorn." That means he wanted to find technology that can fight climate change and have global market potential to actually sell its products. Well, he thinks he's got it with this new concept. Planetary Hydrogen is the company, and what it does is he and some of his colleagues they got together with some marine scientists and backing from the Capital Angel Network, as well as a Toronto-based VC, to start working on technology that speeds up a natural process of removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere that occurs, as he says, in nature. It's a geological process whereby carbon dioxide gets dissolved into rainwater. The rain falls, rocks absorb the carbon dioxide. Over time, that creates another substance, a bicarbonate, kind of like baking soda. If you want to give a comparison, it's washed into the ocean where the carbon dioxide ends up on the ocean floor. So that's a natural way of taking carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. The problem is that takes hundreds of thousands of years on its own. So what Planetary Hydrogen has done, they figured out a way to speed up this process using electricity. They basically they send an electric current through ocean water that splits up the water molecules into hydrogen and oxygen. That creates a byproduct called mineral hydroxide, which then binds with the carbon dioxide. I know this is kind of sounding like a Bill Nye the Science Guy kind of lecture, but in a nutshell, that's how it works. So you kind of have to be a scientist to really understand the nuts and bolts. But the bottom line is, it sucks carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and as a byproduct, it creates hydrogen, which can actually be a very lucrative like a lucrative product, and that's where the market potential comes in. Kelland is an environmentalist, but he's also a businessman, and he sees plenty of upside in this hydrogen byproduct because hydrogen is already a $150 billion global industry, but a lot of environmentalists and energy agencies, they believe it's only just scratching the surface here. That it could be worth 10 times that in another 30 years because of its potential as a green energy alternative. In cases where electric power, for example, isn't feasible, like jet aircraft or big transport ships, hydrogen can probably be an effective substitute for petroleum, as well as in other processes like fuel used in making steel. So, so there could be a huge potential market for hydrogen, which is the main byproduct of this carbon capture process. So, so Kellen really sees it as a win-win on two fronts. He thinks this technology can help the environment and produce a new greener fuel. So it's really interesting. They're now working on a test project. They're setting up in Halifax near the ocean, and they think within the next 3 or 4 years they'll really have a good handle on whether it's going to be able to work on a mass scale. And in the meantime, they're trying to get more funding to really step up the testing and see. Now it's going to be, they're years away yet from commercializing this, but Kellen told me he really thinks that there's going to be a lot of potential in this technology.
No doubt it's a giant idea, and if the technology ever worked, it could become a unicorn. It's a big idea and big potential. Listen, we're going to start wrapping up. Peter, give us a sense of what's coming up at OBJ.
So we're going to be continuing to release some of the key results from the Welch LLP Ottawa Business Growth Survey that we spoke about earlier. So we're going to be releasing some of the findings. And of course, we want to be letting people know that, of course, they can see some of that on obj.ca. But to read the entire report and all the findings, you can go to ottawabusinesssurveyreport.ca to get a full copy.
Okay, ottawabusinesssurveyreport.ca, long URL, but pretty straightforward. And I understand we're still working on a major project, annual project, the Book of Lists. So we're looking to at companies to work with us to update their listings and research. Is that right?
This is the largest research project that OBJ undertakes. So it's a survey of hundreds and hundreds of local companies. Our researcher, Lisa Thibodeau, is right probably in the midway point of that. So please keep your eyes out for an email from Lisa. And as well, you can go to obj.ca to share your information to make sure that your company is included in the next edition of the Book of Lists.
Great. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you very much, Peter and Dave, for being part of the show. Of course, I want to point out to everyone that you can listen to the podcast on Spotify and other platforms such as SoundCloud. You can watch this podcast on OBJ's YouTube channel. And as always, we encourage everyone to subscribe to OBJ Today, a weekday email newsletter sent out by OBJ to stay on top of all of the headlines, not just the ones we're highlighting in this show. So that's it for today. I'm Michael Curran, signing off on behalf of my colleagues, Peter and Dave. Hope to see you real soon.